Hello, everyone. You are watching the Capital Press Club podcast series in the business. I'm your host, Colin Campbell, and we are here talking about people who are in the industry in communications and journalism, public relations. My next guest is someone who I met several years ago when working for the foreign news media, but since then, she's had a decade's worth of experience in reporting, working as a communications director for the city of Jackson in Mississippi. She's worked as a reporter for several news affiliates, including CBS, the CW, and ABC, as well as working for the Black News Channel. So I'd like to welcome Candice Cole.
Thanks so much, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah,
I'm really happy to be here. It's so, you weren't doctor back then, so I'm like, oh yeah,
I
put
know
that
it's
doctor on
been a while. I
it.
know a few things changed. Well, one
Yeah.
of the first things I wanted to ask you, because yes, when we met each other, you were kind of starting out and everything. So what I wanted to ask you first off the bat is what was one of the most important things you've learned while being a journalist?
That is a really big question, really good one. And I would say what comes to the top of my mind is to be open and to not make assumptions. I would say that those are my have been my two biggest takeaways over the last decade of working professionally.
That's great. So when you started out, we're working for foreign news media, and then what happened after that? Where did you go?
So, after that, I took a bit of a hiatus, and it wasn't really an intentional one, but I wanted to really pound the pavements and to see if I could, tap into the local news markets. So I had a brief stint where I was doing some odd jobs here and there, and then I finally landed at WBAL Radio 1090 AM, and I was there for about 3 months or so before getting my first TV news gig as a reporter, producer, and anchor in Elmira, New York at WENY. And then from there, it
Wow.
kind of went on.
So wait, you were doing all of those jobs simultaneously with what
Yeah.
was like maybe your second job on air? Is that
Well, that
correct?
was my first. Well, let
Yeah,
me
I
back up.
understand. Like your first real job on air, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I got you. I got
yeah,
you.
yeah.
But you were doing all of those. How did you balance it?
I was committed. I was dedicated. I was like, okay, Candace, this is your sink or swim moment. So you got to break in here and you really just got to make it work. And by the grace of God, I did. I started off, I was reporting the day shift, day side. And then I went to producing and anchoring the morning show. Then I was just producing for a while. And then I ended up being night side for a while. So, I mean, it was just, they were long days, not a whole lot of pay, as, many out there know when you're first starting out in broadcast news. But I was committed to my dream and my purpose and being a storyteller, helping people through that medium. And I just made it work, you know?
If you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to answer this because we know some things can be private, what was your starting salary?
My starting salary would have been $24,000 in
Wow.
2012, but because I had a master's, it was $26,000.
That $2,000 bump. Hey, but you know what? Every dollar counts sometimes, right?
That's
So,
right. That's right.
yeah.
And again, I was able to make it work. Thankfully, a lot of cup of noodle nights, but that's okay.
Yes, I'm familiar with those styrofoam containers of ramen and hot water just mixed in so you have dinner for the evening. I know how that is.
Right.
I think when I started out, it was around, I had to haggle up from 18.5, I think, in my first job. So yeah, and it
Wow.
was still, and I haggled up to still less than what you were making. So, but that was several years before. But yes, you're right. Starting out, not a lot of money at all. Some people think it's, you get into instant cash and that you're making a good living right away, and that's often not the case when you're starting out on air.
That's right. I've found that a lot of times it's almost like a trade-off. Oh, you get to be on air, so we don't have to
Mhm.
pay you this much. And like, yeah, that's true, but I also have to eat. Number one, thankfully, the cost of living in Elmira wasn't exorbitant by any means.
Mhm.
So again, I was able to make it work as many others do.
Yeah. And so how long were you there?
I was there for about a year and a half, 18, 19 months, before I went down to Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah. And so, okay, now in Jackson, Mississippi, you were not a reporter. You went into a different area of the industry. Tell me about that. How did you get into that? And what did you make of that adjustment?
Yeah, so actually, I've been to Jackson twice. So the
Okay.
first time I was down there was as a reporter. I was only down there for a year. But then again in 2018, I went back down to serve as the communications director under Mayor Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi. So that was quite an adjustment. But I think by that time, I had, quite a few years. I had at least 6 years under my belt as a professional broadcast journalist. So I had kind of this, set of skills that was transferable in order to like really make that transition work. Now, of course, there were, a lot of things that, I was completely new at, and to be this, such a daunting task to be the comms director of a city, of a capital city, one of only 50 in the entire country. When you think about it in those terms, it was like the pressure was on, but it was a great 2 years I was there for, and I really got a chance to dig into the role, build things from the ground up because there was not a comms department, dedicated comms department at that time. And, I just have to say this about the people of Jackson, Mississippi. They are a gem. I am so glad that my husband and I took the leap of faith to go back down there when we did and really, see things progress when we did.
So you not only had the daunting task of adjusting to a different role in communications, but you also had to convince your husband to move there with you to Jackson. I'm not sure where he's from, but it sounds like you were living somewhere else and you had to say, "All right, honey, let's pick up and move somewhere down south." Is that the case?
Well, kind of. So the thing is, I met my husband during my first stint in Jackson, which
Oh, okay,
was
okay.
yeah, and it's funny because that was around 20, yeah, that was in 2014. I met him
Mhm.
while I was out on a story. He had gone to Tougaloo College and had been there really for about 20 years. So by that time, but he was, looking to move to DC too. So, he followed me from place to place.
Mhm.
So we went from Jackson to Richmond, Virginia, back home to DC. And again, neither of us were really planning on going back down there. So it was a bit of a sell because I don't think that he was really ready to go back down there.
Mhm.
But eventually, he came around and it was fine.
That's great. That's great. And
Yeah.
you said you were in Jackson for how long? The second time as a comms director?
Yeah. The second time I was there for just over 2 years.
Just over 2 years. Now, were there any tools that helped you adjust from being a journalist, a daily, news on-air news correspondent, on-air news reporter, to being a comms director? What were those transferable skills you talked about?
Yeah, so number one, I would say first and foremost, my previous relationships that I had maintained just by being a working journalist down there really went, a long way. They really did help to serve me because I already, had a rapport with a lot of the journalists down there, TV, print, what have you. And so I kind of came in the door with this, Rolodex of folks who I knew I could reach out to, and then also just having an inner working knowledge of what is newsworthy, like what news directors and news teams would be looking for insofar as their coverage. And then also knowing when to hold news conferences, press conferences rather, so that they would be the most advantageous time, especially for television news broadcasts down there. So I would say just some of that just institutional knowledge of how newsrooms, work and operate really helped to serve me well.
That's great. And so after that, you went back into reporting. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And
Uh,
where'd you go
well,
after that?
Well, I would say I would back up a second because I moved back home during the pandemic, in the midst of the
Oh,
pandemic.
okay.
My husband and I were expecting. It was a great time for us to actually be back home with our support system. So
Hmm.
for about a year, I worked for 617 Media Group, which is a PR firm focused on amplifying social justice issues. And then I ended up at Black News Channel. So I was at 617 for about a year, and then ended up at Black News Channel. Largely in part thanks to my longtime mentor, Del Walters, who used to be an anchor on ABC 7 here in DC for a while.
Yeah, that's right. He's kind of a legend around here, from what
Yes.
I've been told and from what I've seen on air as well. I've never met him. One day, hopefully, I'll get the pleasure of meeting Mr. Walters for sure. Now, you brought up Black News Channel,
Mhm.
definitely a station that a lot of people were tuning into, but then the plug was pulled rather abruptly. Could you
Mhm.
tell us? There's probably a lot to unpack there, but I wanted to start out by just talking about where you are now. Like what happened after they it was like I guess a Thursday or a Friday where they just said, "Okay, that's it. You're not coming back to work, right?"
Right. So, I guess the first telltale sign came, the day before that Thursday, and I just will not ever forget this because I was literally sitting in the hearing of Ketanji Brown Jackson. This was the fourth day, so this was the like the witness panels, and we got this email that payroll would be delayed, and so, that's never a great thing. But, things happen. You try not to jump to conclusions. But truth be told, there had been, the talk of this, rumor mill and whatnot. And then, the next day, my old intern from DCW 50 sent me an LA Times article that said that BNC was shutting down. And unfortunately, that was how many of us found out. And I want to be careful with how I address this because I don't want to frame it in a way that makes it seem as though that was the intention. I mean, I really do believe that our CEO, Prince Hare, and the leadership was doing all that they could to prevent this from happening. But unfortunately, this is just kind of like where the cards have fallen.
Yeah, it seemed like there were a little bit, there were signs of difficulty. I remember seeing an ad campaign where it was saying to get your friends to watch and try to pull in two people. I had never seen that before. I thought it was kind of clever, though, actually. I know it's unprecedented and not often seen. I also know it was criticized, but I thought that it was an interesting method or an interesting marketing campaign to try to encourage people to watch. It's something that we do sometimes naturally anyway when we want people to tune in to a certain station, especially to boost its ratings or to just help us have a voice out in the broadcast space. I do remember talking to people and saying, "Hey, you should check out BNC for more inclusive coverage of what's happening on the ground in various protests that are going on, especially with the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearing." And I believe that's actually when BNC saw a ratings spike during that time.
Yeah, that was actually, if and I believe that I'm saying this correctly, our highest grossing viewership during that week. We had really hit a peak, and we were really on a high from that, if you will. And and even just being afforded the opportunity, I do need to say this. Working at BNC for the short amount of time that it was for me, it was only 6 months, but. For having that access and that opportunity was really just a godsend for me. I feel really blessed. But yeah, to kind of have our knees cut out from under us as we were gaining such traction and such momentum and such during such a historic time, especially for our community. It was just really, it was shocking and heartbreaking, to be honest, because I can honestly tell you that everyone who was a part of, uh, you know, BNC's coverage was committed to that mission.
Yeah, and when people are watching at home, we know how it is sometimes when we're watching people on television, anchors or reporters, you feel like you sort of form a relationship with them, even though it may be more one sided. You look forward to seeing them and what stories they're going to do. So I remember seeing Shannon and Mike and
Hmm.
everyone on there. I remember seeing you on there as well. You were part
Yeah.
of a segment, and it was just cool to see some familiar faces, people I hadn't seen before, and to just know that there was a space on news that really focused on our community. As you know, the Capitol Press Club was formed because a lot of journalists and media professionals were excluded from the status quo space, like the National Press Club. And so the
Hmm.
CPC was formed. And back in my journalism history, I remember working at BET and just how special I thought that was to talk about stories that I wasn't going to see anywhere else. Tell me, what did you like most about that experience working at BNC?
Wow. I would have to say the ability to be in a safe space, as a Black journalist, as a Black woman journalist. It just, I've said this, multiple times, but even just something as which may seem silly to some people, or just, not that important, but even just the fact that I could, feel comfortable being on air with my natural hair or with braids, or that sort of thing, and feeling that support, knowing that everyone, you're surrounded by people who get it. And to me, that was, the relationships that I was able to build there, the camaraderie that we had, and the focus on the mission of really being able to tell stories a lot of times that get left out of your mainstream news media outlets, was really just priceless for me.
Yeah, one of the conversations that seems to come up often is trust in media. And when you have a space where they're really focusing on issues coming from the community, they may be tackling them or addressing them on a different angle than you may hear in the mainstream. A lot of people are paying attention to that and feel at a loss when they don't see themselves being represented or where they don't feel like their voice is being heard. Why do you think that we're facing so much distrust in media in general? Where when you look at polling, when you look at the way that people feel about media, we're at one of the lowest points that we've been in years. Why do you think that's happening now?
Well, I almost called you Colin, but Dr. Campbell, I would say,
Yeah.
to be quite honest, I think, the polarization of where we find ourselves, as a nation, and it certainly doesn't help. I mean, I have just never been a proponent of right leaning or left leaning news outlets. To me, that's not really news. You're filled with so much commentary, to where viewers, we know that viewers tend to watch what they want to hear. They will tune in to a station that will feed the narrative that they want to believe, but that is really doing a disservice to everyone. And I guess, I might just be old school in this sense of just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. I mean, I think a little bit of commentary is fine to add some color and some context, but when it is clearly drawing a line between, your right wing media and your left wing media, I think that just allows for too many things to get lost in translation. And then especially when you look at some of the things that have happened, even with regard to, like, take the Trump Clinton election that happened a few years ago, and the infiltration of our social media outlets by foreign entities. I mean, these are things that have just continued to eat away at the trust of media overall, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the things that we started out talking about was you said never make assumptions. Never make assumptions. I wanted to unpack that a little bit. What inspired that thought and what made you think of that as one of the biggest lessons you've learned from being a journalist?
I think just looking back over my career, I'll never forget. I'm sorry, my dog is like literally sitting on it, one of the cords here. But just thinking back to actually the class that I had with Dell when I was at Bowie State, he would tell me, you cannot assume that you know how your story is going to ultimately play out. And I feel like it's just kind of natural when you come upon people to make assumptions about them all the time. I mean, we are human beings and we judge first based off of what we see. So, you know, in thinking of, some of the people who I have been privileged enough to interview and who have trusted me with their stories, they're if you judge everything by the outside, it's almost like that old adage, don't judge a book by its cover. There are just so many different layers, to these stories, to these people who, again, trust us with telling their stories. And that you just might not, part of being a journalist is being curious and finding out, what is really going on here, and what does this person, for example, represent. What are all of the layers that make this person who they are, and what makes them interesting? And that's something that I really cherish about local news, and the ability to tell those human-centered stories.
Yeah. So, is there a particular story that stands out to you during your career, one that you just never get out of your mind, or one of your favorite stories that you've done?
Oh goodness, that is a big one.
Mm.
Well, I will say that one in particular that comes to mind just off the top of my head is when I was in Elmira, Horseheads, New York. I did this story very early on in my career about a special education teacher who was suffering from ALS, and it was just, when you're in it and you're writing it, you're doing, your interviews, you're very close to it. I was just kind of amazed at the reaction that story brought, just from my colleagues in the newsroom. Just to hear how dedicated he was with his students, and he was at this point not totally far gone, but his, the ALS had advanced quite a bit. But to be able to, you know, tell his story and shed light on how much what he's doing, his teaching meant to his students, and then even, the parents of some of his students, and his family. Um, it was just, I'm trying to think back because it was so long ago. I think I was at the hairdresser and I saw this, like this collection thing, like for donations at my hairdresser's booth, and I was asking questions. I was like, "Oh, what is this for? And who is this?" And all of that. That's what, eventually led me to even doing the story. Um, but yeah, I mean, telling the what am I trying to say here? Telling the contributions of, everyday people and the impact that they have. That is an example of one of those stories, and it just really, it just really struck me to see how that all came together, and again, the reaction that it garnered.
Yeah. So, have you always been a really curious person, or was that a skill or an attribute that you developed being a journalist?
I would say that I have, for the most part, been pretty curious about a
Mhm.
lot of things, which is why me and Google are like this. Like, Google's like my
Ah.
best friend, um, as it is for a lot of people, right? But
It's like an app on your home screen, right? On your phone, you know
right,
exactly
right.
where it is. Quick thumb press, and you're there. You can look anything up.
Exactly, exactly. But I would
Mhm.
say though, what piqued my interest even more, I would say even early on, is has been watching a lot of documentary film, from even when I was in high school, even that the topics that would be covered like really did sparked this interest in me to want to tell these long form, impactful stories. I haven't quite gotten there yet in my career, but that is someplace that I am trying to eventually move toward. But um, yeah, just a curiosity and a a sense of wanting people to be informed about what is happening in the world around them, and what their government is doing. We see so many instances of injustices, happening uh, here in this country and around the world. So really shining a light on those kinds of things as well is really, what's driven me to take on a career in journalism.
Yeah, and you've had the opportunity to work at several different affiliates, like we mentioned before. Okay, so
Mhm.
the CW, ABC, CBS, no NBC?
No,
Not yet. Okay, did you
not
notice
yet.
a difference? Not yet. Not yet. Exactly. Not yet. Not yet. Did you notice a difference working between the affiliates, what their news focus was?
Um, Not not really. I would say once I got to DCW 50, News at 10, which is under Tribune, unfortunately is no longer here, but I hear that it is making a resurgence now under Nexstar. But I think with DCW 50, there was more of a, wanting to be fresh, on the scene and offer more in-depth coverage and more feature type stories as well, and not concentrating so much on if it bleeds, it leads, which I found to be refreshing, and something new. I mean, because to be a new local news outlet in a city such as DC, I mean, you really have to be bringing something new to the table. So I found that to be quite refreshing, actually.
That's great. So, Candice, what's next for you? Where you go? Where do you go after this?
Well, hopefully, I get to stay on the Hill, and reporting from there in the White House. That is what I am working toward. I'm kind of in this limbo now where I really don't know where I'll
Mhm.
land, but I'm hopeful. I have some irons in the fire, and I am happy to keep you updated when I find out where I end up. But I would like to stay working on the Hill and at the White House.
That sounds wonderful. Well, I hope you do keep us informed. Let us know what your next steps are. It's fun watching an old friend of mine keep making progressions along the way. I think that's amazing. And I will be looking out to find out where you end up next. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
stopping by, Candace. I really appreciate it. You were a person that I wanted to have on here when I saw you on BNC. I said, wait a minute, you'd be great to have on here. Great voice, great face. You just, you have it all. So, thanks again for joining us. All right.
Thank you
And
so
for
much,
all
Dr. Campbell.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And for all of our viewers out there, don't forget to check out our website at capitalpressclub.org. Become a member. We have a special rate going on right now for you. It only takes a few minutes to become a member. Stop by our website. I want to give another special thanks to someone you don't see on camera. His name is Derek Kenny. He's the one who's helping to put all this together. I can't do this all myself. So I want to give a shout out and a special thanks to DK for helping the Capital Press Club put this together and so we can have this as an ongoing series. So we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching and take care.